China acted quickly then. While it initially slowed the Korean army, their advance sped up after breaking through the demilitarized zone defenses. The massive collapse of North Korean forces in several areas caused the front line to become unstable. The defeat of the Chinese volunteer army at Gyeomgang-san and Jangjeon deeply angered Beijing's leadership. The Jeongal unit's reputation for battling overwhelming odds became well known among Chinese troops. Within the Chinese army, rumors spread that it was a unit made up only of the strongest men. These rumors actually caused the morale of the Chinese troops to plummet. Beijing's leadership was shocked by this. They considered themselves a great power and thought Korea was just a small country, so it was understandable that they were shocked when the army of a small country was defeating the army of a great power. The South Korean army was not just fighting against the North Korean army. It was shocking that even China-backed volunteer forces were totally crushed by superior force. Despite being called volunteer forces, they were essentially the Chinese army with Russian weapons. Even Deputy Commander Su Jonglu of the northern government was concerned. When the ceasefire line was breached, the national army quickly lost its strength. In particular, the fact that the 22nd Division and the Jeongal unit captured Jangjeon much faster than expected was a huge shock to the Chinese army. They had advanced to Wonsan's outskirts, causing the Chinese army to fear the Eastern Front's collapse. Chinese People's Liberation Army officers sat before Deputy Commander Su Jongru of the northern government, reviewing documents with serious expressions. On top of that, they were also worried that Gaeseong might be breached on the Western Front. Within the Chinese army, there were growing calls to deploy additional troops. They believed not intervening quickly could lead to North Korea's defeat. Pagey's screen updated in real time with the latest satellite images and South Korean army progress. On the Gaeseong front, the 7th and 1st Corps prepared a massive offensive with fully organized reserves following behind. The North Korean forces in Gaeseong were desperately building defensive lines. Because of that, the Chinese army also had very few options to choose from. They reinforced Chinese troops in North Korea. China urgently reinforced the Chinese troops stationed in North Korea by deploying 3 mechanized divisions and 1 airborne brigade to the North Korean region. In addition, to make up for the weaknesses of the existing North Korean forces, they even deployed a large-scale drone unit to North Korea. More Chinese troops were coming in. Aiden Jang, an intelligence analyst at the Defense Intelligence Agency under the United States Department of Defense, was conducting intelligence analysis as usual today. Today, the information gathered left intelligence analyst Aiden Jang stunned. This happened after reports that the Chinese military would send more troops. That's because the materials he saw included satellite images capturing large-scale Chinese armored units crossing the North Korean border. They planned to use a large drone force to fight the war instead of the North Korean military. Agent Aiden Jang quickly grabbed the phone and made a call somewhere. Agent Aiden Jang quickly thought he should give information to Korea, as if fearing World War III. Insider materials from the United States indicate South Korea was tracking more Chinese military activity. American reconnaissance satellites and intelligence assets were secretly moved to South Korea without United States approval. This allowed South Korea to quickly detect Chinese military movements and prepare. Numerous pro-Korean agents in the United States secretly shared Chinese military details with South Korea. South Korea relied on United States reconnaissance satellites and wiretapping to track Chinese troop movements in real time. The South Korean military leadership and the government of the Republic of Korea couldn't help but be enraged when they received this information. China deploying more troops further increased anger toward the United States. They were frustrated that the United States gave no support, while China sent more troops. The Secretary of Defense, seeing China's deepening war involvement, began considering strikes on the Chinese mainland. Korea was asking the United States why they weren't supporting them. South Korea asked the United States for a video conference on military support and abuse issues. But the United States actually responded in a brazen and shameless manner. They said they were already giving South Korea military supplies, medical aid, and reconnaissance data, and asked what else was expected. Then South Korea responded by saying, the United States and South Korea are blood allies who have shed blood together. How can you just stand by and watch while South Korea is collapsing? Does that make any sense? The United States mocked South Korea, claiming Seoul would have fallen without their help. South Korea was furious. As many Chinese troops entered the Korean peninsula, South Korea and China neared direct conflict and asked if the United States military would intervene. They warned that without United States help, South Korea would need to develop nuclear weapons and strike China in self-defense. They said it was essential for South Korea's survival, while the United States claimed advancing north would cause World War III. The United States threatened to only delay military, medical, and intelligence support. Our interests kept clashing, so Hanguk suggested a compromise, asking the United States to defend the rear areas. They argued United States forces in Korea should be reinforced as a tripwire to bolster the peninsula's defense. It was a moment when tensions between Hanguk and the United States were intensifying. However, the United States could no longer simply watch the situation on the Korean Peninsula without acting. Because the United States was showing a lukewarm attitude, other American allies like Japan, the United Kingdom, and France were starting to doubt the United States. Meanwhile, Hanguk was waging a battle for public opinion in the international community. Are you suggesting the United States neglected its allies? As a result, other American allies also began to distrust the United States, and in the end, the United States had no choice but to accept Hanguk's demands. Though a full game wasn't possible, United States Forces Korea maintained rear area stability. The United States deployed 1 additional armored brigade and 2 artillery battalions to Hanguk and worked to stabilize the rear area, and the divisions that were in charge of guarding the rear area moved up to the front lines. Advanced equipment like the F-35B and F-22 fighter jets were also deployed to Hanguk, and they doubled the supply of military goods to the Hanguk military. In the end, the United States had no choice but to increase its support in order to maintain a relationship of trust with Hanguk. However, since the United States did not intervene, Hanguk couldn't help but continue to doubt the United States. While the United States remained passive, United Nations Command members increased support for Hanguk. The United Nations Command was created during the June 25, 1950 war to defend Hanguk from North Korea's invasion, fighting with national forces against North Korean and Chinese armies on the Korean Peninsula. It's still a multinational allied force in Hanguk and Japan. The United Nations Command now acts as a bridge between the Republic of Korea, United States Combined Forces Command, and the international community, supporting contributing nations' military efforts. Its purpose is for United Nations Command member states to indirectly help Hanguk. 18 countries provide military forces to the United Nations Command, including the United States, United Kingdom, France, Germany, Italy, Canada, Australia, Belgium, Colombia, Denmark, Greece, Netherlands, New Zealand, Norway, Philippines, South Africa, Thailand, and Turkey. The United Kingdom and France have sent naval units to Hanguk but haven't deployed ground troops yet. Instead, they were providing a large amount of military supplies. The United Kingdom supplied Storm Shadow missiles and 100 AS-90 howitzers, while France sent 50 Leclerc tanks and Mistral air defense missiles. Germany sent 20 PZH 2000 howitzers and the infrared imaging system TAIL thrust vector-controlled air defense system. Canada provided much ammunition and protective gear. Although they called it support, these items still had to be bought later. The United Kingdom, France, and Germany led European nations in boosting and actively supporting Korea militarily. They also criticized the United States' passive attitude. The United States' lukewarm attitude actually led other Western countries to actively support Korea. With the active support of United Nations Command member countries behind them, Korea was preparing an even stronger offensive. The United States, following global trends, increased pressure on China with 3 United States fleets already in the Western Pacific. They kept patrolling the Yellow Sea, East Sea, and East China Sea to pressure China and tightened economic sanctions. They imposed economic sanctions on electronics, electric vehicles, and solar panels, further tightening the noose around China. The United States criticized China and presented evidence to the world of China's deep involvement in the war. The United States and Western nations started pressuring China diplomatically. However, China strongly objected to this and instead claimed that South Korea had illegally invaded North Korea. A major diplomatic conflict was starting between South Korea and China internationally. Meanwhile, the Republic of Korea Army's 7th Corps and 1st Corps launched a massive offensive on Gaeseong to capture the city. The 7th Corps launched a frontal assault with armored units and artillery, while the 1st Corps attacked the flanks with infantry divisions. They advanced smoothly until just before downtown Gaeseong. Despite North Korean anti-tank attacks, the 7th Corps firepower was overwhelming. Many tanks, including powerful K2 main battle tanks, kept advancing even as some were destroyed. They literally overwhelmed them with sheer firepower. However, although they somehow managed to reach the outskirts of Gaeseong with the help of the 7th Corps up to the battle at the church, the reason behind it was the problem. Tanks struggled to perform at their best in urban warfare. A tank's role is to bombard enemies from afar, provide cover for infantry, and use its mobility to break through and disrupt enemy lines. However, each building is a sturdy fortress, requiring significant time and resources to destroy. Modern reinforced concrete buildings are too durable to be damaged by 1 or 2 bombardments. When tanks enter the city, surrounding buildings create ideal spots for infantry with anti-tank weapons to attack from alleys, windows, and rooftops. Additionally, the city's dense buildings restrict firing range, while narrow streets and obstacles impede tank movement. Because of this, even though Gaeseong City was right in front of them, they couldn't recklessly send in the tanks. As a result, they didn't need a large number of tanks. They needed to make some adjustments to their strategy. Gaeseong was a fortress thoroughly defended by North Korean forces and Chinese volunteer troops. Inside Gaeseong, there were bunkers and underground fortresses built by the Chinese volunteers, as well as numerous anti-tank obstacles and minefields. The North Korean forces and Chinese volunteers stubbornly held their ground, enduring the South Korean army's bombardment and shelling. The 1st Division suffered heavy losses trying to enter, as Gaeseong's defenses were too strong to break through. Time spent in Gaeseong sped up advances on the eastern and central fronts, but failure to break through Gaeseong halted progress there as well. All fronts had to advance together. If one moved ahead too far, its flanks could be exposed. So they focused all their efforts on capturing Gaeseong. That included the Army, Navy, and Air Force. The K-2 standard tank entered Gaeseong Church and fired its main gun relentlessly at the North Korean positions. Shells hit enemy positions, collapsing buildings and bunkers. The K-9 self-propelled artillery bombarded from the rear. Shells tore through the sky and rained down relentlessly on Gaeseong, with the intention of flattening the city. The Republic of Korea army was determined to completely wipe out Gaeseong. The Navy didn't just stand by either. A Sejong the Great-class destroyer in the West Sea launched Haesong-2 cruise missiles which streaked across the sky and shook Gaeseong. Buildings collapsed. F-15K and KF-21 jets flew over Gaeseong, dropping more bombs. It was like hell, with hundreds of missiles and shells striking Gaeseong daily. In that situation, the Chinese volunteer army and North Korean forces were fending off the South Korean military's attacks using drone strikes. The Chinese volunteer army's swarm drones attacked South Korean infantry, causing a brutal massacre. The Chinese volunteer army and North Korean forces were responding using these drones. First-person view drones hit South Korean armored vehicles and K-1-2 tanks, while numerous kamikaze drones targeted infantry positions, causing ongoing casualties. Reconnaissance drones gave Chinese forces real-time updates on South Korean army movements, letting them track their routes. They were shelling that area with mortars. The South Korean army was unprepared for drone warfare and suffered heavy damage without an effective response. As the South Korean army struggled to respond, Chinese military drones kept pressuring them. The Republic of Korea army is currently unprepared for drone warfare. That's understandable, as drones have only recently been used in warfare. Drones have been used since the 2020 Azerbaijan-Armenia war, so there's little doctrine or training for drone warfare. Consequently, drones were attacked even while conducting their own attacks. The South Korean military quickly set up anti-drone teams and demonstrated how to neutralize drones. They used the new Changwang laser weapon, which greatly reduced drone attacks compared to before. As support for Gaeseong's fall grew, the South Korean military considered a larger-scale encirclement of the city. The Jongwon soldiers were also playing a big role in this war. They ran a public opinion campaign by sharing videos and photos of North Korean and Chinese volunteer soldiers being pushed back on Telegram and social media. Judging by these social media posts, it looked like the Korean army was advancing north without casualties. As a result, people from all over the world were supporting Korea, cheering for the achievements of the Korean army, and this led to increased international support for Korea. Korea has a unit assigned to the National Strategic Rapid Response Force, using air assets for rapid enemy deployment, similar to the United States 101st Airborne Division. There's also the 7th Corps, specifically the 2nd Division, known as the Noto Unit. The 7th Corps deploys the 201st Rapid Response Brigade and the 203rd Rapid Response Brigade of the 2nd Division to the Gyeongchon area, which is north of Kaesong. Accordingly, the plan was to cut off all supply routes heading to Kaesong. At the same time, they intended to capture Kaesong by attacking the weak rear of the Kaesong defensive line. The 2nd Division completed an airdrop into Gyeongchon with air support and landed safely. The 7th Corps had the 8th Division bypass Kaesong and move north in case of unexpected events. This decision was made because it would be dangerous for the 2nd Division to be alone in the rear. The 8th Division succeeded in bypassing Kaesong and creating a massive encirclement around Kaesong through Gyeongchon, Jangpyeong, and Paju. As I mentioned earlier, without the Chinese volunteer army, the North Korean forces would have simply surrendered, so the advance was easy. While bombarding Kaesong at dawn, they tightened the encirclement and knocked on its gates. Anti-China sentiment is rising in South Korea, leading to more attacks on Chinese and Joseonjak people. This may seem understandable to some. Anti-China sentiment was already strong, and now with Chinese troops being pushed into the Korean peninsula and escalating the war, it's understandable how families who lost loved ones to the Chinese volunteer army must feel. However, there are also a significant number of Chinese and Joseonjak currently staying in South Korea, but not all of them have been able to return to China. They endured discrimination, persecution, and death threats in that situation. The Chinese accumulated these grievances, which eventually escalated into the Soyu incident in Seoul. The Soyu incident happened mainly in Daerim-dong and Sillim-dong, where Chinese and Joseonjak communities coexist. They began by protesting with signs in Korean and Chinese, but it quickly escalated into a violent riot. They raided facilities in Korea, with some Joseonjak and Chinese people causing riots there. They attacked stores, smashing windows and stealing goods. Some defended themselves in vehicles that exploded. They also attacked major facilities and government offices in Korea. There were over 1,000 rioters. Protesters hurled Molotov cocktails at police stations and used heavy equipment like excavators to threaten precincts. They were saying not to mess with China and asking to protect the rights of the Joseonjak. These disturbances were gradually spreading. Some pro-China groups waved Chinese flags, insulted the Korean government, and looted. Scenes of attacks on the police were captured in various places. Some officers were seriously injured and eventually lost their lives. The South Korean government viewed the major Seoul disturbances as a national security threat and started considering military deployment. This was because it was impossible to suppress the situation with only police forces. On top of that, they even showed signs of being organized. The government labeled them an organized rebellion, not just protesters. Are you saying the police alone can't handle them? Some government officials worried that using military force for a violent crackdown could spark international controversy. Some argued that armed rioters were killing police, so with martial law declared, a strong response was needed. Ultimately, military forces were deployed to suppress them. Rioters resisted with Molotov cocktails as soldiers fired rubber bullets and used force and shields to disperse them. Within just a few hours of the military being deployed, the riot was completely suppressed. The Ministry of National Defense, through the Ministry of Public Information, announced that Chinese rioters were attacking key facilities in Korea. They portrayed them not just as dissatisfied people, but as spies trying to undermine the Republic of Korea. Rumors in China claim massacres of Chinese people were occurring in Korea, worsening tensions between the two countries. Western media outlets such as Cable News Network and British Broadcasting Corporation reported that China was inciting unrest in Korea after the chaos in Seoul. The Chinese Ministry of Foreign Affairs accused the Korean government of killing ethnic Koreans from China and Chinese nationals, warning of strong measures to protect its citizens. Although China started the war, it also began pressuring Korea economically. They announced additional economic sanctions against Korean companies and deliberately stirred up anti-Korean sentiment, causing attacks on Koreans residing in China. The Korean government stayed firm, sometimes forcibly deporting arrested Joseonjak, Chinese nationals, and rioters. The government increased crackdowns in areas with many Chinese residents and shut down major pro-China media outlets. These actions were allowed due to martial law. As riots erupted in Korea, anxiety increased, and some civilians formed vigilante groups and armed themselves. The Ministry of National Defense spokesperson held a press conference at the Republic of Korea's press hall. The Ministry of National Defense spokesperson said the recent riots are more than simple disturbances. He called them terrorist groups trying to undermine the Republic of Korea's order. He said they have evidence that groups linked to the Chinese government fueled the rebellion by exploiting pro-North Korean sentiment. At the same time, the spokesperson for the Ministry of National Defense stated that they can no longer tolerate China's interference. He said any threat to South Korea will be dealt with firmly, showing the government's clear resolve. He stated that they will protect South Korea's independence and freedom to the end, and that even in the face of threats from China or provocations from North Korea, they will never back down. South Korea's independence and freedom.
We will protect South Korea's independence and freedom to the end. We will protect South Korea's independence and freedom to the end.
We will protect South Korea's independence and freedom to the end.
South Korea's independence and freedom, South Korea's independence and South Korea's independence and South Korea's independence and
To protect independence and freedom until the end. To protect independence until the end.